Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Academy Critic. In this episode, we're going to be covering the 41st Academy Awards, which honor films released in 1968. I know it's been a long time since my last upload. Sorry about that, but just had a lot of really great movies from this year to cover, so let's jump right into it with the very first category, Original Song. The nominees for this category are Star from Star, Funny Girl from Funny Girl, For Love of Ivy in For Love of Ivy, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and The Windmills of Your Mind from The Thomas Crown Affair. Now, gotta admit, have only seen Funny Girl and The Thomas Crown Affair. However, I have listened to For Love of Ivy and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and from those two, I'm definitely vibing the most with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. But let's get into the nominees that I've actually watched, starting with Funny Girl. All right, so the titular song for Funny Girl is nothing that has me blown away. It doesn't really stick in my head or have me repeating a tune. Not the catchiest, but I really do want to compliment the orchestral musical numbers that are in it. It's got really great sound to the song. So although it's not my favorite song, I would be lying if I said it didn't have a nice sound to it. The winner of this award was The Windmills of Your Mind, which is the song that plays in the Thomas Crown Affair. And I gotta say, I do prefer Funny Girl over this song. Quite frankly, I just think that it's too fast paced. Which feels faster than I think it should. The lyrics and the way it's sung, it almost feels like they're beckoning to be sung at a bit of a slower pace. However, I don't think it really gives the song that much time to breathe, which is unfortunate because I don't think it's a bad song. I think there's actually a really good song in here, but in order to reach its full potential, I think it would have to be altered a little bit. So that's just my opinion. The nominees for the best score of a musical picture are The Young Girls of Rochefort, Star, Funny Girl, Finian's Rainbow, and Oliver. I have admittedly only seen Funny Girl and Oliver, so let's jump right in with Funny Girl. My commentary on the score for Funny Girl actually isn't that different from my commentary on the original song. I wasn't blown away by it. However, the orchestral music that I mentioned in the last category applies here as well. It does sound really, really nice. I like it, but it's ultimately not doing anything to garner an Oscar win, which it didn't win. Oliver won, so let's talk about Oliver. One thing that I think Oliver has going for it above Funny Girl is I think the musical numbers in this movie are better. So before these became movies, both of them were actually stage musicals. And I would say that one thing the score has going for Oliver over Funny Girl is simply that the musical numbers in Oliver, I think, have better songs that give because this can be an adapted score, and it gives the score composer better elements to work with, I think, that make for a more memorable musical experience, especially when they can use the tunes from songs like I'll Do Anything, Who Will Buy, stuff like that, reviewing the situation. There's a lot of really great songs in this movie, and I think the score does take advantage of those themes and use them to the best of their abilities. The nominees for Music Original Score for a Motion Picture that is not a musical are The Thomas Crown Affair, The Shoes of the Fisherman, Planet of the Apes, The Fox, and The Lion in Winter. Real quickly, I want to mention a few snubs. First of all, Once Upon a Time in the West has really great music going for it. Not shown here. You're not going to see it shown pretty much anywhere this video. We'll talk about that a little bit. Furthermore, Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet, I really thought it was going to be here. I think it should win. It's beautiful. The music in Romeo and Juliet is gorgeous. So, yeah, that's really missing out. That's a snub I had to mention because it's just devastating. But without further ado, let's get into the Thomas Crown Affair. At the end of the day, I just think that this film score ends up just being rather forgettable. I actually went into this movie fully aware, like, okay, yeah, so it won original song, but it also got a nomination for original score. And even going into the movie with that in mind, walking away from it, I couldn't hum a single tune or really remember what instruments were used. It just didn't really stand out to me. At the end of the day, I don't have too much to say about its score. It's simply not that memorable. The score for Planet of the Apes is very unique. It's a little bit sporadic, often very random. I don't mean that as an insult. I actually think it suits the tone of the movie well, especially because the characters are in this world that they're unfamiliar with and they don't really know where they are. They're finding their way around, so they don't really know what's coming next. The score really matches that energy, which I think is a really cool use of music. Particularly the use of piano, I think stands out. It sounds almost like the fingers of the musician are like dancing around the keys. So that's pretty fun. I definitely think it's better than the Thomas Crown Affair, but I wouldn't quite say that it's as good as the winner of this award, which is The Lion in Winter. The score for The Lion in Winter, in particular the main title by John Barry, is very punctual, very loud, very in your face. It's very royal, one could say. Pun very much intended. Um, yeah, it's very memorable. It has tunes that stick in your ear for a longer time, but it can also be a bit more mellow. In particular, I think the Herb Garden is a really peaceful hymn. Pretty much, it's very chorus heavy. There's a lot of chorus as well as trumpets in this score, which give it a nice diversity, a nice variety, and I think make it really stand out. And yeah, I'm glad it won this award. I think it deserves it. The sound nominees for this year are Star, Funny Girl, Finian's Rainbow, Bullet, and Oliver. I've only seen Funny Girl and Oliver. I really wanted to watch Bullet. I didn't get around to watching Bullet, unfortunately. It looked really interesting. Looks like a movie that I'd probably enjoy, but it didn't happen for me this year. So without further ado, let's talk about Funny Girl. When I reflect on the sound in Funny Girl, I really struggled to find something that stood out and made me think like, oh yeah, the sound design in this movie is really, really good. I find this happening repeatedly with musicals, primarily because I think they're nominating them because they do a really good job recording the sound of the singers. Um, but apart from that, I can't say too much on this movie that stood out to me in terms of its sound design. Oliver, on the other hand, while it has a similar, it's also a musical. I think it does have more going for it in terms of its sound design, and a lot of that is because the musical sequences they're much more involved than they are in Funny Girl, which just has one or two people singing and walking around. This one has a lot of dancing and it has like literally dozens and dozens of people singing, so it has much deeper layers of sound going on in both the voices of all the actors as well as just the foley of them moving around their environment, jumping up and down and dancing and doing all these sorts of stuff. So yeah, definitely from these two movies, I think the winner is pretty clear, and I think they made the good call. Okay, the nominees for special visual effects are Ice Station Zebra and 2001: A Space Odyssey. I've only seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, and oh boy, let's talk about it. I don't even know where to begin with this one. I mean, this movie just revolutionized visual effects. If you've seen it, you know about it. Even if you haven't seen it, you probably know about it. Um, whether they're on the moon, whether they're in some like interdimensional zone or in space, I mean, it just looks so good. Especially for 1968, it's unbelievable. The map paintings all look amazing. There's a lot of sequences that are super trippy, especially the final act. The final act looks amazing. I don't even always know what it is I'm looking at. I feel like sometimes I could be looking at, life in the future or maybe the origins of life. Maybe I'm not looking at anything alive. Maybe I'm looking at a nebula or something. But it's I mean, if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's so trippy in the best way possible. There's a conspiracy theory out there that Stanley Kubrick directed the space or the moon landing. That only exists because this movie is as good as it looks. Like when conspiracy theories are coming from how good your movie looks, that's when you know you're doing something right in terms of visual effects. Like until Star Wars came out, this probably was the best, in terms of effects, the best looking movie ever. I haven't seen one older than Star Wars that matches up to 2001: A Space Odyssey. So yeah, it's an icon of cinema for many reasons, but the visual effects is just one, and it yeah totally deserves this Oscar. The cinematography nominations for this year are Star, Oliver, Ice Station Zebra, Funny Girl, and Romeo and Juliet. There's quite a few snubs I want to mention here. Um, the primary one is 2001: A Space Odyssey. We just talked about it. We know it looks great because of the visual effects, but also the visual style that it's shot with is spectacular. Furthermore, Once Upon a Time in the West looks amazing as well. Shame looks really good. War and Peace, while I think War and Peace has goes a bit too far with the handheld sometimes, uh, overall looks really, really good. So those are just some movies I wanted to mention before getting into the actual nominees. But without further ado, let's talk about Oliver. Overall, this movie looks good. Some of the sunset shots at the end are the most appealing in my opinion. I don't think that's what's getting it to the nomination. If anything, the way it shot the dance sequences with all the well choreographed dancing that fills the frame and uses space in a really nice way is probably what's getting it here. That being said, I wouldn't say that this is one of my favorite nominees of the year. Now let's talk about Funny Girl. This is another movie that, while its cinematography wasn't popping out to me while I was watching it too much, it's far from ugly. I don't think it has the same appeal as Oliver quite does. But like I said, neither of these are my favorite shot movie of the year. The only shot that really stood out to me while I was watching it was the one where she's on the tugboat and it's a big sweeping camera shot that goes around and you got the Statue of Liberty there. That's a really great shot, best shot of the movie in my opinion. Apart from that, not too much stood out to me. But this movie didn't win. Romeo and Juliet actually won, so let's talk about that. Above the other movies that I just mentioned, I would say Romeo and Juliet is probably the most interesting movie to look at. I'm glad it won this, not just because I think the production design and the costume designs, which we'll talk about later, complement each other really well. But there's a unique aesthetic that doesn't quite happen as often in more modern movies because you're just looking at things in worlds from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I think this is a 14th century movie or something that you're not really going to see in everyday life. So it inherently has more of an appeal and more of an opportunity for really unique visuals that you might not get elsewhere. It does use them pretty well. I think there's some great shots in alleyways that use space nice and use silhouettes in a good way as well. So yeah, the lighting in this movie is good. Overall, it's shot pretty well. Still nothing compared to something like 2001: A Space Odyssey, but of the nominees, I'm happy with this decision. Okay, the nominees for art direction are War and Peace, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Star, The Shoes of the Fisherman, and Oliver. Let's start off with War and Peace. Throughout my watch of War and Peace, I found myself repeatedly blown away by all the amazing sets and production design that this movie has to offer. There's this ballroom sequence, for instance, that when I was watching the movie, I wasn't sure if it was a set. I definitely noticed it, like, dang, that's huge. Part of me thought that's just a pre-existing ballroom that they are filming in until I saw some behind the scenes stuff. And when I was watching the behind the scenes stuff, I was like, no, that looks like they're filming in like a set, like a sound stage. So that's crazy. But even more than that, when you get into, the latter two parts of this movie, because it's split into four parts, because the film reel was so large. The Battle of Moradino, all of the battle sequences, the battles in the first part as well as, the burning of Moscow, so expansive and so vast and so detailed. The camera moves up and down, it turns around, it zooms, it goes all over the place. No matter where it turns, you don't see the end of the set, you don't see other crew. It's you're just there and you're in it, and it's vast, it's huge, it's crazy, honestly, that this movie didn't win, quite frankly, just given how expansive the art direction really is. 2001: A Space Odyssey has very impressive production design. Not only does the detail within the buildings and the spaceships look very unique and very well put together, but it's very impressive from an engineering level because you have entire sets that are like spinning around. Because remember, the spaceships they're in, they spin so that they can simulate Earth's gravity, and so you get these amazing shots of following a character and it looks like he's just walking upside down in a big circle, but that's simply the set rotating to move the way that the spaceship would. That's crazy. That's really impressive innovation, and I love that the Academy recognized it. The sets in Oliver are great. The nomination is not surprising at all. It's very deserved. The win, bit of a different story. So, like I said, the sets are really great. The sets in London look super duper cool. They're very immersive. And also the main set around where Oliver lives looks very, very good. But when you compare it to the engineering that went into 2001 A Space Odyssey, or simply the vast expanse and detail that went into War and Peace, I find the win a little bit underwhelming in my opinion, even though it does have very good art direction. The nominees for costume design this year are Star, Planet of the Apes, Oliver, The Lion in Winter, and Romeo and Juliet. Now, I have not seen Star, and before I get into the nominees I have seen, I do want to mention a couple of snubs. One of those being Funny Girl. Not a devastating snub, but it is a movie. When I was watching it, I noticed the costume design and expected it to be something that the Academy would go for. But a bigger snub is War and Peace. The quantity alone, having to, dress 15,000 extras in these battle sequences is already super hard, but then you also have just the quality of them and the variety of them. So War and Peace is something I thought they'd go for, but they didn't. But without further ado, let's jump into the first nominee, Planet of the Apes. Now, what I'll say about Planet of the Apes is that most of the costumes aren't too crazy. I mean, the humans are wearing rags, obviously, and most of the apes are wearing these standard green uniforms. But one thing I appreciated was the variety in the roles of the apes. What I mean by that is the guards and the hunters and the judge, for example, they all have different costumes that they have to wear, which kind of adds to the world building of the movie, which is really necessary for films like this to, get really immersed. And the costume design does serve that. So, yeah, I think it's good. Okay, let's talk about Oliver. Now, similar to the art direction production design category, period pieces tend to do pretty good in the costume design category, and Oliver is no exception. One thing I do like about Oliver is that it also has variety, like I mentioned in Planet of the Apes. However, this one is a bit more class based. What I mean by that is that some of the characters are obviously super wealthy, wearing more extravagant stuff, what you would expect from, a costume design movie. But then on the other hand, most of the main ensemble is very poor. They're wearing dirt, cheap rags, not quite rags, but just low quality. It builds character, and the costume design alone can tell a story about where our characters come from and what they've gone through. And I think the best example of this is Dodger. He is wearing fancy clothes, but they're very clearly rough and ill-gotten, and I think that dichotomy fits his character really well and tells a story on its own. So the costume design in this movie is pretty good. The costume design in The Lion in Winter surprised me a little. What I mean by that is that um, you expect the king and the queen to be wearing super flamboyant and extravagant robes, and sometimes they do. Some of the costume design in this movie is very impressive. Most of the time, they're wearing much more simple clothing. I'm not going to say that they're wearing like rags or anything. They're wearing good clothes, but it's not as showy and flashy as I'd expect. Now, I'm not an expert in the 14th century wardrobe of English kings, but it may serve as historical accuracy. All that being said, I do think the costume design in this movie is really good. I think there's some that have really cool intricacies to them. I was just a bit surprised by some of the costume design, I'll say. The winner of this award is Romeo and Juliet, and I'm not surprised about that. The costume design in this movie, very thorough, very detailed. I think it shines most in the scene at the Capulets' party. That's kind of a really great opportunity to showcase the costume design, and they do it really well. But even in the everyday sequences, the clothes people are wearing are just, they really catch the eye. They're very well thought out. But I think the most prominent costume that stands out is Juliet's red dress, which is just beautiful. So it's really cool to see it win an Oscar. The nominees for film editing are Wild in the Streets, Oliver, The Odd Couple, Funny Girl, and Bullitt. Like I said, I haven't seen Bullitt, even though I really wanted to. The only ones I have seen are Oliver and Funny Girl, so let's start off with Oliver. Oliver's got a pretty clearly set out 3-act structure, which I think is very effective, but I think the thing that stands out the most, and I've talked about this a lot, I'm going to talk about it here again, the musical sequences are really well put together, and they're really well edited. They have a great flow to them, and I think that's because they change in scale. They're not just the exact same throughout. They start off a bit smaller, one or two people singing. As more people get involved, it can end up sometimes being dozens and dozens and dozens of people just singing the whole set, just singing and dancing. And despite that pretty dramatic shift in scale, it has a very seamless flow to it. So that's something that I think is really hard to navigate, but they actually did a really good job. So compliment to them. The three act structure in Funny Girl is not as prevalent, which not every movie has to follow that strict structure. I think it's the most important. You'll probably in future videos hear me talk about it again. But I think my main gripe with Funny Girl's editing is that they wait way too long to introduce the main conflict. Most of the movie, there's not too much conflict. Everyone is kind of getting along pretty well. And actually, they don't really introduce it until the final act, which I think makes more of the beginning of the movie not as interesting as it could be. So I think that editing choice, and also it's a screenplay choice, which we'll talk about, but I think that hurts the movie more than it helps it. The nominees for actress in a supporting role are Estelle Parsons in Rachel Rachel, Kay Medford in Funny Girl, Sandra Locke in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, Lynn Carlin in Faces, and Ruth Gordon in Rosemary's Baby. Let's talk first about Kay Medford in Funny Girl. What I'll compliment most about Kay Medford is her general screen presence, which is really comfortable. She is very cozy in this role. It suits her pretty well. I haven't seen her in anything else, I don't think, but yeah, I thought she was doing a really good job. But I think the scene that is really getting her the nomination is a scene later on in the movie when she's looking at her daughter and is very clearly concerned about her and her life and, you know, the decisions that she has made to lead her to where she is. And all of that is portrayed with just a look, and she doesn't really say anything, so I think that's really impressive, although I wouldn't say it's anything to garner an Oscar for her. Okay, now Lynn Carlin in Faces is really good in this movie. Probably my favorite performance here. I think she is very impressive. She'll give a she'll give like the heartiest laugh you've ever heard, and it still feels so genuine. It doesn't feel acted at all. And then, you know, right after that, she's having to face the dark reality of divorce, and so there's just like a tonal shift that her character goes through. But I think she really shines in the last 20 or so minutes, which I personally think are the best part. It's the best part of the movie, and a lot of that goes to her performance. She's kind of overdosed, and she's kind of on the verge of trying to stay awake, but also blacking out. And it sounds like, you know, you just act sleepy. Like, no, she does a really great job. I think she's undeniably impressive in this movie. All right, the winner of this award is Ruth Gordon in Rosemary's Baby. Now, at first when I was watching this movie, I didn't think she was too great. I found some of the choices and reactions that her character made to be a little off. But the farther into the movie I got, the more it made sense to me. And looking back on it now, I actually think she did a really good job. So Ruth Gordon plays Rosemary's neighbor, and she is kind of being this stereotypical, like, very, very well meaning, very, very kind, very, very friendly old neighbor who's also very, very intrusive, very, very nosy, just a little bit uncomfortable, but very well meaning, is what it seems. And that ends up putting us in a position where we can kind of just like really relate to Rosemary. I feel like we've all had someone in our life where we're like, okay. So that gives us a person that we can kind of use to relate to the main character, Rosemary. But ultimately, that very relation that we have makes the end of the movie so much more horrific. If you know, you know. But yeah, this performance is pretty great. I'm not going to say that I like it more than Lynn Carlin's performance, but yeah, she's very, very good. Now, the nominees for Best Actor in a Supporting Role are Gene Wilder in The Producers, Jack Wilde in Oliver, Daniel Massey in Star, Seymour Cassel in Faces, and Jack Albertson in The Subject Was Roses. Let's start off with Gene Wilder in The Producers. Calling Gene Wilder a supporting actor in this movie is almost categorical fraud. I mean, do we really see him that much less than, Zero Mostel, the other lead in this movie? I would call Gene Wilder, a lead role. They're co-leads in this movie. You can't really have this movie if you don't have both of them being like super prominent. I don't really think we see one of them that much more than we see the other. So I feel like they kind of did Gene Wilder weird by calling him a supporting role when he's very much so at the center of this movie alongside Zero Mustel. But before this movie, the only movie I think that I'd seen Gene Wilder in, or at least what I associated him with, was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Now, Willy Wonka is obviously a super iconic role, and he's very like outgoing and very charismatic. So to see Gene Wilder be kind of this socially awkward, partially probably on the spectrum individual, yet who still managed to be pretty funny and charming, all the while being a bit awkward, showed me kind of the range that Gene Wilder has, which was really cool to see. It's a role that I've never seen him in, so that was really fun, especially when he's just from everything I've seen him in is just Willy Wonka. So to see him in a new role was really cool, especially a role that's pretty comical. And that leads me to the fact that this movie is getting a supporting actor role. This is not the type of movie you usually see it in. I mean, we just talked about a horror movie. Now we're talking about like a comedy. So to see a movie this silly end up in the acting category is pretty fun. It's also really cool to see a kid get nominated for an Oscar, which Jack Wilde did for Oliver. Now, Jack Wilde was 16 when Oliver came out, and when I found out about that, I was actually quite surprised. I thought it was much younger because Mark Lester, who plays Oliver, he was 10 when this movie came out. And when I was watching the movie, I figured that Jack Wilde was probably like a few years older than Oliver. I did not think he was going to be 6 years older. So I don't know how old his character Dodger is supposed to be, but yeah, Jack Wilde definitely did a really good job. He's super memorable. He plays this character Dodger who's pretty mischievous, but he plays him in a very likable way, and it's super fitting because we're kind of seeing him from Oliver's perspective, who is kind of lost and doesn't really know where to go. So he's going to cling on to like kind of the first other kid he sees, and that ends up being Jack Wilde's character. And does a really great job. Ultimately, just super cool to see a person this young get nominated for their performance. So yeah, way to go. All right, now the last nominee I've seen is Faces, which has Seymour Cassel. Man, these nominees are all three of these movies are so very different, which makes for, a pretty fun award season. But yeah, Seymour Cassel is giving another really great performance. He plays Lynn Carlin's lover in this movie. And yeah, like I said about her in the last 20 minutes of the movie, I think she does outshine him a bit, but he's really, really good, especially when she's OD'd and he's trying to, make her wake up and make sure that she doesn't die on him. There's just a real tangible fear and worry in his face. Very believable. Yeah, I think he's super good in this movie. The nominees for Best Actress are Joanne Woodward in Rachel, Vanessa Redgrave in Isadora, Patricia Neal in The Subject Was Roses, Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl, and Katharine Hepburn in The Lion in Winter. Now, I've only seen Funny Girl and The Lion in Winter. However, what's odd is that both of these movies won. So I'm not sure if it was a tie is what happened. If that's the case, that's pretty rare. But yeah, for some reason, both of these movies ended up winning the award for Best Actress. And admittedly, I do think both of them quite frankly deserve it. So let's get right into it, starting with Funny Girl. Barbra Streisand playing Fanny in this movie is so delightful. She is so fun. She's a bit quirky. She's very outgoing, and just a joy to watch. And it's even more impressive once you realize that this is actually her first role ever. Her first role in a movie got her an Oscar. She's great in it. So she plays this girl who wants to become a dancing performer on stage, and ends up being very successful, not because she is so good at everything she does. In fact, she's actually quite cumbersome a lot of times, and not very, doesn't have a lot of hand-eye coordination, but she makes everyone laugh so much that, they just fall in love with her, and the audience does as well as, you watch this movie. She's a very likable character, and Barbra Streisand really does a great job. She really carries this movie, I'd say. While Katharine Hepburn's character in The Lion in Winter is much more serious than Barbra Streisand's in Funny Girl, she also has a lot of comedic moments. She drops these really great one-liners throughout the movie, and just does it with such a confidence and tact that she's also really fun to watch. However, she also has more serious moments, whereas most of Funny Girl's serious moments are a bit saved for the end, although Barbra Streisand nails those as well. Katharine Hepburn's are a bit more prevalent throughout the movie. Yeah, I think she's the best performance in the movie, probably. Yeah, she's the best performance in The Lion in Winter. She's very memorable, and I'm really glad that she also got an Oscar for her performance. The nominees for Best Actor are Peter O'Toole in The Lion in Winter, Ron Moody in Oliver, Alan Bates in The Fixer, Alan Arkin in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, and Cliff Robertson in Charlie. Now, the only movies I've seen here are The Lion in Winter and Oliver, so let's start off with judging Peter O'Toole's performance of King Henry II in The Lion in Winter. When I was talking about Gene Wilder earlier, I mentioned that before this, I just kind of only associated him with Willy Wonka. Now, for Peter O'Toole, before this, the only thing I'd really seen that I associate him with is Lawrence of Arabia, which is a beast of a movie. So for me to kind of have Peter O'Toole break away from that and not really have me be thinking about Lawrence of Arabia while I'm watching The Lion in Winter is very impressive, especially because, T.E. Lawrence and King Henry II are wildly different characters, with King Henry II being very, very loud, very, very prominent. He demands the attention in the room. Peter O'Toole plays him wonderfully, so it's really great to see that. He's super good in this movie. Now, Ron Moody in Oliver, I would say is actually playing a supporting role. I wouldn't say, I mean, some movies have co-leads, like I mentioned with the producers, at least I think that they're co-leads. But with Ron Moody, I think that Oliver is the only character in Oliver that you could rightly consider the lead. That being said, I think Ron Moody probably gives the best performance in the movie. He plays Fagin, who is this longtime thief who kind of wants to retire, yet kind of keeps getting drawn back into the crime aspect of life. And so that can be a really tough line to toe, but he ends up making the character quite likable. So, admittedly, a selfish thief, but a very likable one at that. That's pretty hard to do, but Ron Moody does it in a very, very memorable manner. The nominees for Best Original Screenplay are 2001: A Space Odyssey, Hot Millions, Faces, The Battle of Algiers, and The Producers. Now, real quickly, only snub I want to mention is Planet of the Apes, which I'm not too surprised it didn't get, and I'm not too mad about it either. It's just something I thought the Oscars might go for. I think it's got nice themes going for it. But without further ado, let's talk about 2001: A Space Odyssey. When a movie gets nominated for a screenplay award, you expect it to be a very dialogue-heavy movie. Now, 2001: A Space Odyssey is definitely not that. In fact, despite the 2.5 hour runtime of 2001: A Space Odyssey, there's less than 40 minutes of dialogue. So you're thinking, what are they doing with all that extra runtime? They're doing quite a bit. And it manages to be very, very thematically deep and rich despite not having the dialogue. So I think that actually helps the screenplay because it doesn't lay on the themes very thick. So my camera died. I didn't realize it died until after I had finished filming the entire episode. So it's another day. I'm back and I'm going to finish the video. I believe I was talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey's screenplay. So I'm just gonna pick off from where I left off. Yeah, so I was about to tackle the movie's themes of space travel and evolution, human evolution, and artificial intelligence, and the roles that they play in human evolution. So yeah, I think its AI in particular is very, very interesting because it's more relevant now than ever before, obviously. And it's harrowing when you realize that it's only going to get more relevant as time goes on. It's very rare that you have a movie that only gains relevance with time. It doesn't really lose it. Even the stuff like space travel, I would say the space travel is the thing that was probably most relevant when it came out, because of the space race and all that. But yeah, the artificial intelligence, its depiction of it, because this is the 1960s, yet it creates this speaking computer that just kind of encapsulates human knowledge. And this is before the internet, let alone actual artificial intelligence. So then you get into the themes of when evolution can actually lead to bad stuff, like AI taking over, turning evil, turning against humanity. That's kind of foreshadowed in the discovery of weapons from the apes at the beginning of the movie. which is it's just so interesting how the tools that our evolution brings about can be used against us. Um, yeah, really great stuff. Um, if you haven't seen this movie, you got to get on top of it. Be warned, it's very, very slow, but it is an absolute treat to watch. All right, the next movie I want to talk about is Faces, which I actually have mixed feelings about in terms of its screenplay. I'll talk about the stuff I don't like about it before. It just simply can feel directionless at times. It didn't grab me. It didn't hook me in for the full 2 hours. There were times I felt like, okay, let's go. But apart from it not being, in my opinion, the most gripping plot, the dialogue is. So whenever two individuals are speaking, it just has such a genuine flow. It feels so very authentic. It's really hard to encapsulate that, but I think the movie in that regard did an actually amazing job. So I kind of have mixed feelings about this screenplay, but I'm not surprised that it's here. The Battle of Algiers is a movie that I was surprised to see here. I'm not disappointed that it's here, but it's just not a movie I really thought that the Oscars would go for, yet they did. And what I gotta say about this screenplay is that it adds to this movie's dedication to realism. That's kind of the whole shtick of this movie, is that it is so very authentic and genuine. And if the dialogue was clunky or didn't feel realistic, it would kind of destroy that illusion. It would break that flow. You wouldn't actually feel like you're watching real people doing real things, which this stuff is based on real history. So yeah, it completely adds to and elevates the realism and immersion of the story rather than taking away from it. So they did a really good job. The winner of original screenplay for this year was The Producers. Now, it's funny to talk about The Producers after looking through, Space Odyssey and Faces and all that, because while those movies can get philosophical and, more serious, this movie's just funny, which is good, but it's really great to see that, the two leads, clash and bounce off each other in really fun ways. But when you compare it to some of the other movies that we've just talked about, like, Battle of Algiers and so on, I just think it kind of falls short a little bit. The nominees for Best Adapted Screenplay are Rosemary's Baby, Rachel Rachel, Oliver, The Odd Couple, and The Lion in Winter. We're going to talk first about Rosemary's Baby. And I want to mention here that it's pretty rare actually to see a horror movie in the screenplay category, but it's really cool to see that, especially a movie like Rosemary's Baby, which is such a classic. And I think actually that this is the first horror movie that we've really talked about on the channel, so it's really cool to see. But what I want to say is that the movie does a great job, the screenplay does a great job of making you feel like you're in Rosemary's position. You feel, when you're watching this, very isolated, very alone, like you don't have anyone that you can go to, that you trust. It really nails that. Admittedly, I'll say it's a bit slow. I think it is too slow, especially near the beginning of the movie before it really starts to snowball. However, once that snowballing does start happening, it leads to a final act which is insane. It is totally crazy. And I watched this movie while I was dog sitting, actually. So I kind of watched it at night alone in a pretty empty house. And yeah, no regrets there. All right, let's talk about Oliver. So I quite like Oliver, the movie, not the character. And what I mean by that is that I don't have any actual distaste for Oliver Twist, but I just felt like he was pretty underwritten. I didn't really have a deeper understanding of who he was as a character. I had a great understanding of what has happened to him and what he's going through as I'm watching the movie, but on a deeper level, him, not as much. I also noticed this movie reminded me in plot a lot of Annie. That's not really a gripe on the movie. It's just something I noticed. Just not in the details, but in the general outline. Orphan with a bad living situation gets taken in by a wealthy man, only to end up, getting taken back by the people he lived with before, stuff like that. That's not to diss on Oliver. In fact, the story of Oliver Twist is quite a bit older than that of Annie, being based on a Charles Dickens novel. But yeah, my real gripe with this movie is just the main character, Oliver, is pretty underwritten in it. The winner of this award was The Lion in Winter, and oh boy, does it deserve it. Because this is a movie about a monarchy, it kind of get a 2-for-1 with a family drama that's also a political drama, which is just so exciting because it's the most dysfunctional family you're ever going to have. Everyone's trying to betray each other and, get other people on the throne. King Henry puts his wife in prison but lets her out on holidays. But seeing them interact with each other is great because there's the political enmity, but also a bit of, interesting affection there. So yeah, they have a bizarre relationship for sure. The conflict in this movie is very genuinely entertaining, especially paired with such great performances, obviously. While some of the history is more likely than not a bit fabricated, it's undeniably fun to watch. And yeah, it's the dynamics it explores is really interesting, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The nominees for Best Directing are 2001: A Space Odyssey, Romeo and Juliet, The Lion in Winter, The Battle of Algiers, and Oliver. The two nominees I want to mention before we get into the nominees we have, the snubs I want to get into, are War and Peace, which, yeah, I don't even know how you begin to direct something of that scale. I'm kind of surprised the Academy didn't go for it, but it's a foreign film, so they tend to stay away from those, although they like Battle of Algiers here. But also Once Upon a Time in the West, which, it's Sergio Leone. They don't like him as much as most people do, I guess. But without further ado, let's start with 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is masterfully directed. The main job of a director in a movie is to have a vision, a clear and precise vision, and also have the ability to communicate that to everyone else working on the film. And if you have a really good director who has a good vision and is able to communicate it well, that's when you end up with a movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which has Stanley Kubrick's fingerprints all over it. It's widely regarded as one of Kubrick's best movies, and that's not a small feat, especially when you look at his total filmography. And yet this one, it lives up to the title. It should be considered one of his best. It is. A movie like this in the hands of a lesser director wouldn't be what it is today, and I don't want to see 2001: A Space Odyssey in the hands of a lesser director. Stanley Kubrick directs the crap out of this movie. All right, the next movie we're going to talk about is Romeo and Juliet. Now, while I'm probably not going to seem as enthusiastic about the directing of Romeo and Juliet, that doesn't mean I don't love this movie. In fact, it is one of my favorite movies of the year. But one of the things I think stands out about it the most is the general beauty of it. We've talked already about the costume design and the cinematography, both of which did win an Oscar, but you also have the music in it, which is spectacular. And then also, Shakespeare's writing it's hard to top, really. So ultimately, when all those elements come together, you end up with a very well executed and very beautiful movie watching experience. All right, let's talk next about The Lion in Winter. One of the things that I think stands out the most from this movie in terms of its directing is the performances that I've already talked about that get pulled out of the actors. It's very impressive and very effective. I mean, Katharine Hepburn did win her Oscar, deservingly so. Now, to be fair, the thing that the directing that I'm not as crazy about in this movie is the fighting, which there's not that many fight sequences. However, the movie does open with one, and I think the directing in those scenes just feel a little clunky. But beyond that, I think it's a really great movie that I definitely love. All right, now we're going to talk about The Battle of Algiers, which has very unique direction. Also, love to see it here. Surprised it's here. Not disappointed that it's here. I think it absolutely deserves it. Definitely one of the best directed movies of the year. It's filmed, I don't want to say it's filmed like a found footage movie because that's not quite accurate, but it's more like watching a documentary. Which I think I said earlier maybe, but it's worth repeating. Everything is so real. And I mean, some of the actors in the movie are even former revolutionaries, which just add to that realism. But yeah, I think some of the copies of the movie actually have a disclaimer at the beginning that kind of state, by the way, this is a recreation of events, not actual footage. And when you have to put that in there so that like, hey, this is what you're seeing isn't actually real, that's when you know the directing is crazy, and it absolutely is. Now, the winner of the directing Oscar for this year is Oliver. And while I've said before, I like this movie, I think it's a good movie that I thoroughly enjoyed, it really does not deserve to be taking home the directing Oscar. Now let me speak first about the things that I do like about it. And it's something I've talked about quite a few times before already. The musical numbers are very well choreographed, very well put together. They're well paced. So those are probably in terms of the directing, the best thing that this movie has going for it. Although there's also a couple performances that we've already talked about, Fagin and Dodger, that are really great. However, when you compare it to some of the other movies, I don't think it has the realism of the Battle of Algiers. I don't think it has the performances, of The Lion in Winter. It doesn't have the beauty of Romeo and Juliet, and don't even get me started on 2001: A Space Odyssey. So yeah, paired with the other nominees, this is a surprising win. The nominees for Best Foreign Language Film are Stolen Kisses, The Girl with the Pistol, The Fireman's Ball, The Boys of Paul Street, and War and Peace. Couple snubs. Want to mention that they didn't go for any of the Ingmar Bergman movies like Shame or Hour of the Wolf, which I'm not surprised they didn't go for them, but I would have. I think they're quite impressive. But the biggest snub here, by far, is the Battle of Algiers. Now, I don't expect the Ingmar Bergman's movies to get in. The Battle of Algiers is something that you would expect, especially considering it got original screenplay nominated at least, as well as best directing. Yet it's nowhere to be found. You would expect this one to be the winner, and it's not even, they don't think it's the top 5. That's baffling. Like, this movie is something that it's, I don't know what happened here. I don't know what went wrong. I don't know why they suddenly flipped on the Battle of Algiers, but it's nowhere near foreign language film. It's not here at all. That's baffling to me. But without further ado, let's get into the nominees, starting with Stolen Kisses, which I think is a fine movie. I didn't love it as much as most people do. I'm glad I watched it, but when you compare it to some of the other movies that are movies that aren't even nominated, it didn't stick in my head too much. So yeah, not a bad movie though. All right, now let's talk about The Fireman's Ball. This movie is pretty short. It's like 73 minutes long, yet it manages to feel so much longer, which isn't good, especially for a movie that takes place over the course of one night. It's just at a ball, and it follows these pretty honestly incompetent firemen who, during this ball, are trying to throw together this really weird beauty pageant, and it's just kind of uncomfortable. I think the movie's a comedy. I didn't find it that funny. The most exciting part of this movie is the scene near the end where this house burns down. But I honestly don't really know why that's in the movie. Sometimes it just feels like stuff is happening, and that can make the movie feel a little bit all over the place, in my opinion. It's fine. All right, the winner of this award is War and Peace. Now, this is, I feel like, from the nominees, a super obvious winner. If something like Fireman's Ball won over this, it would be actually devastating. But yeah, I watched this movie, I didn't watch it in one sitting. I watched it in 3 sittings over the course of a weekend because this movie is 7 hours long. So I wanted to actually enjoy it. The film reel is just so big they had to split it into 4 parts. And part 1 is the longest, which I think is a good decision. It makes the others individually go by a bit faster. When the introduction is the longest, it's like 2.5 hours long, so it's still normal movie length, and then the 3 remaining are each about an hour and a half. But it's good. I like it. Part 2 isn't really even about the war. It's about it's like a really prolonged love story, so it can feel a little bit underwhelming compared to some of the other ones. But part 3 is my absolute favorite. That's where you got the Battle of Borodino, which has 15,000 extras. I don't even know how you begin to direct such masses, but it's a total spectacle, and it's like 30 minutes long. It's just, oh my gosh, I loved it. Part 4 is also a really, really good part. It's also the darkest because that's when you have the burning of Moscow, which is just horrific to behold, but also it's just, yeah, it's so impressive. It's the scale of this movie is insane. Because it's so long, it's not a movie that I'd recommend to anyone lightly, and it's not a movie I'll probably watch for a very, very long time again, though I might see myself revisiting it after I read the book, which I have not read yet. Here it is. Look, this thing is huge. It's like 1,200 pages. So yeah, it's gonna be a long time before I hit this up. But after I do, I might revisit this movie. And I'm looking forward to it. I think it was great. I think it's thematically really deep. The sky, if you watch this movie and you pay attention to the sky, it plays this unique role of peace, because there's a lot of war in the movie, but there's pauses in the battles when the characters can look at the sky, and it's this pause from the warfare going on. You can't see what's going on around you. You're just looking at the sky, and that kind of plays the role. You're looking at something higher, more elevated, superior, and so it's unreachable. And that's another reason why I think it's the role of peace. There's even um, a lot of shots of the battle from head on from the sky above, so it's almost like God's eye view, looking down at the destruction below, and it just looks like ants that are tearing themselves apart. But yeah, really, really liked it. Thought it was really effective. If you're gonna watch it, prepare yourself because it's 7 hours long. Now there's two honorary awards that were given out this year. One to the Planet of the Apes, and the other to Oliver. I'm gonna speak first about Planet of the Apes, which I believe received this award for its makeup and hairstyling. Now, makeup and hairstyling was not yet a category at the Oscars, so in order to honor the great work that was going on here, it received an honorary award, and I gotta say, oh boy, does it deserve it. The monkeys, the apes in this movie are just, they're not just putting on masks, they're prosthetics that are very deliberately attached to the actor's skin so that they can have realistic facial movement, and the movie wouldn't be the same without it. It's so iconic, really compelling, and totally deserves this groundbreaking recognition. Oliver, on the other hand, I don't think it's pushing anything on a technical level, to new extremes. So I don't see what specifically it's getting this award for. I guess they just really, really liked this movie. And, I like this movie too. But in terms of an honorary Oscar, I'm not quite sure what that's for. This year's Best Picture nominees are Romeo and Juliet, Rachel Rachel, The Lion in Winter, Funny Girl, and Oliver. Now, in terms of movies that didn't get nominated for anything, I wanted to mention a couple at this point. Something like Once Upon a Time in the West, but also Night of the Living Dead, which I haven't talked about at all, so it feels weird to bring it up at this point, but that's one of my favorite movies of the year, and I just wanted to mention it before we get into the Best Picture nominees. But the two truly tragic Best Picture snubs are The Battle of Algiers, which we knew that it wasn't gonna get in here from the absolute betrayal that was the foreign language category. But the biggest snub of the year for Best Picture is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is my favorite movie of the year. I think it's generally regarded as the best movie of the year, at least the most iconic. So yeah, it really should have been here. It would have been a decision that aged super well for the Oscars. But yeah, they missed that opportunity, I'm afraid. Romeo and Juliet, of the nominees, is my favorite. This would actually be the movie that I voted for to win Best Picture. I haven't seen this movie before now. It had been 7 years since I'd last watched it, because I read it in high school. It was kind of my first real introduction to Shakespeare. It was Romeo and Juliet, which is a phenomenal play. And yeah, watched the movie and then didn't watch it for 7 years, just revisited it and just fell in love with it. It's such a beautiful experience. It's the movie that moved me the most of the nominees, so I really, truly enjoyed it. It's Shakespeare, so the writing is just absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it's a movie I very much love, and I'm glad it got nominated. All right, the next nominee I'm going to talk about is The Lion in Winter, which is probably my second favorite nominee. This is another movie that would actually be a really cool win. I've talked about the performances way too much in this video. Also, the screenplay is amazing. We've already talked about that. Not too much to say on this that I haven't said already, but yeah, really fond of this movie. Totally deserves the nomination. Really glad to see it here. All right, let's talk about Funny Girls. Funny Girl. Of the nominees that I've seen, this is probably my least favorite. Not because it's bad, but just because, although it's a delightful time, I think the delayed conflict hurts the story. I think it took too long to introduce it. Wish they had it happen earlier in the movie. I'm not going to beat a dead horse with that, but yeah, that's my general complaint towards Funny Girl. And Oliver, I feel like I keep having to put the disclaimer in, like, Oliver is a good movie because it's winning awards that I think should go to, other stuff. And that includes the Best Picture award, which I don't think you can justify giving it to Oliver when you compare it to not only some of the other nominees, but obviously movies that didn't get nominated, like I talked about in the snub section. It just can be a little bit underwhelming, which is sad to say about a movie that is genuinely entertaining. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you guys got a different favorite movie of the year, or movies that got snubbed for something that I didn't talk about, leave them down in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one, which is going to be covering the 63rd Academy Awards ceremony, which honors films released in 1990. So, in the meantime, watch movies from 1990, form your own opinions, have fun, and I'll see you in the next one.